The black limousine stopped in front of St. Vincent's Cathedral exactly at 3 o'clock. Thomas Brennan adjusted his Italian silk tie for the third time, feeling the weight of the Swiss watch on his wrist. 400 guests were waiting inside the church. Cameras from 3 different networks were already positioned to record the wedding of the year. When the car door opened, Thomas placed his right foot on the red carpet. That was when he saw the boy. A skinny boy, wearing torn clothes and barefoot, was standing right at the main entrance of the cathedral. Security guards were already moving to remove him, but the boy shouted in a voice that cut through the air like breaking glass. "Don't marry her." Thomas felt his stomach churn. All eyes turned to the scene. Photographers began firing their cameras frantically. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 years old, his face dirty with soot, but his eyes burned with an urgency that froze Thomas in place. "Mr. Brennan, please ignore this," whispered Gerald, his personal assistant, touching his elbow. But Thomas couldn't move. The boy was being dragged away by 2 guards, his nails scraping the stone floor as he kept screaming. "She's going to steal everything from you. I heard it. I heard everything." The boy's voice echoed through the ancient walls of the cathedral. Thomas felt something strange crawl up his spine. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. As if a part of him, buried long ago, had finally awakened. "Let the boy go," Thomas ordered, his voice surprisingly firm. Gerald blinked, confused. "Mr. Brennan, the ceremony will start in 5 minutes. Miss Olivia is waiting. The guests." "I said let the boy go." The guards hesitated, looking at Gerald for confirmation. Thomas walked toward them with deliberate steps, ignoring the shocked murmurs of the guests who were beginning to come out of the church to see what was happening. The boy stopped struggling when Thomas knelt in front of him. Up close, Thomas could see that the boy was shaking, not from cold, but from pure terror. There was a recent scratch on his face, still lightly bleeding. "What did you hear?" Thomas asked softly, so only the boy could hear. The boy swallowed hard. "I sleep near her office. Nobody sees me because I'm invisible to people like you. But I hear everything." "What office?" "Miss Olivia's. In the building on Central Avenue. There's a ventilation grate in the parking garage that blows out warm air. I've been sleeping there for 3 months." Thomas felt his heart race. Olivia Montgomery, his fiancée, had a private office in that building. She always said she needed a space to take care of her family's business. "Thomas, for God's sake." Olivia's sharp voice came from the church entrance. She looked radiant in the $40,000 white dress, but her face was twisted with anger. "What are you doing talking to this street kid?" The boy flinched, but didn't take his eyes off Thomas. "She said that after you sign the papers today, you can't back out. There's something about an asset consolidation clause." Thomas went cold. Asset consolidation clause. That was the exact term Olivia's lawyer had used 3 weeks earlier, when Thomas signed a document he barely read. The lawyer said it was just a standard prenuptial formality. "How do you know that term?" Thomas asked, feeling his mouth go dry. "Because she repeated it several times. She was on the phone with a man. She said you're pathetic, that it was easy to make you fall in love, and that after today you'll be working for her without even realizing it." Olivia stepped closer, her heels striking hard against the floor. "Thomas, this boy is clearly lying to get money. It's a common tactic among beggars. Are you really going to let this little thing ruin our day?" But it was the word Olivia used that confirmed everything for Thomas. Little thing. That was exactly how she referred to people she considered inferior when she thought no one was listening. He had heard her use that term once on the phone, talking about an employee she had fired. Thomas stood up slowly, feeling as if he were waking from a long, confusing dream. He looked at Olivia, really looked at her, for the first time in months. Her eyes showed no love or concern. They showed cold calculation. "How long?" Thomas asked calmly. "How long what? How long have you been planning this?" Olivia laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. "You're really believing a street kid? Thomas, you're becoming embarrassing." Gerald approached, nervous. "Mr. Brennan, we need to go inside. The ceremony." "Cancel it," Thomas said simply. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Olivia turned pale, then read. "You can't be serious." Thomas took the boy by the hand. The small dirty hand clung to his with desperate strength. "This boy risked everything to warn me. The only question is, why?" The boy looked up. "Because nobody sees me. But you saw me." If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Leave a comment telling us what you think so far and which city or country you're watching from. Now let's find out what's really going on. Chaos erupted instantly. Guests began pouring out of the church in confused waves, whispering and pointing. The cameras kept recording every second of the public humiliation. Olivia stood still, breathing heavily, her fists clenched at her sides. "You will regret this," she said through clenched teeth. Thomas ignored the threat and started walking toward the limousine, still holding the boy's hand. Gerald ran after them, completely lost about what to do. "Mr. Brennan, please, think about what you're doing. The media will destroy your reputation. Your investors will question your mental stability." Thomas stopped and turned around. "Gerald, how many years have you worked for me?" 7 years, sir." "Then you know me well enough to know that I'm not crazy." Thomas looked directly into his assistant's eyes. "I need you to trust me now. Go to my office and bring me every document Olivia or her lawyers had me sign over the last 6 months. All of them." Gerald hesitated for only a second before nodding and running to another car. Thomas got into the limousine with the boy. As soon as the door closed, the boy began to tremble violently. Thomas took off his tuxedo jacket and placed it over the boy's thin shoulders. "What's your name?" "Daniel," the boy answered in a weak voice. "Daniel Costa." "Daniel, you're safe now. No one is going to hurt you." "You don't understand." Daniel looked out the window, checking to see if anyone was following them. "They're going to want to silence me. I saw too much. It wasn't just about the wedding." Thomas felt a chill in his stomach. "What else did you see?" Daniel pulled his knees up against his chest. "Miss Olivia met with 3 men every Thursday night. One of them was very old, had white hair and a cane with a gold handle. The other 2 were lawyers, I think. They brought thick folders and talked about transfers, about how to make you sign without reading." "Do you remember any names?" "The old man, they called him Mr. Montgomery. But not with respect. With fear." Thomas froze. Mr. Montgomery was Olivia's father, Richard Montgomery, one of the most ruthless businessmen in the country. The man had built an investment empire by crushing competitors without mercy. Thomas had always found it strange how kind Richard had been to him during the engagement. Now he understood why. He wasn't the son-in-law. He was the target. "Daniel, would you be able to recognize the documents they showed?" The boy nodded. "I saw a paper with the name of your foundation. Brennan Foundation for Children. They laughed about it. They said it was perfect because you would never let the foundation fail, so you'd do anything to save it." The foundation. Thomas had created it 5 years earlier, after nearly losing everything in a bad investment. The foundation helped children in vulnerable situations, providing education and housing. It was the most important project of his life, more important even than his own money. And Olivia knew that. Thomas took out his phone and called Helena Cardoso, the only lawyer he trusted completely. She had been his professor in law school before becoming a specialist in corporate contracts. "Thomas? Aren't you supposed to be getting married right now?" Helena's surprised voice came through the line. "I canceled it. Helena, I need you to come to my apartment immediately. Bring a specialist in property law. I think I've been the victim of a legal trap." There was a pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." The limousine stopped at Thomas's residential building. They took the private elevator straight up to the penthouse. Daniel looked at everything with wide eyes, as if he had entered another planet. Thomas prepared a hot bath and set aside clean clothes for the boy. While Daniel was in the bathroom, Thomas walked to the panoramic window overlooking the entire city. Down below, life went on as usual. People came and went, unaware of how someone's world could collapse in seconds. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. 17 missed calls from Olivia. 9 messages from Richard Montgomery. 3 from his business partners. Thomas turned the device off. Daniel came out of the bathroom wearing an oversized t-shirt that reached his knees. He looked 10 times smaller without the dirt and desperation. He was just a frightened child. "Are you hungry?" Thomas asked. Daniel nodded shyly. Thomas ordered food, and the two sat at the kitchen table. While the boy devoured a sandwich, Thomas asked the question he needed to ask. "Daniel, why did you do this? You don't know me. You could have stayed quiet and gone on with your life." The boy stopped chewing. His eyes filled with tears that he tried to hide by quickly wiping his face. "Because I've seen people like her before. People who hurt others just because they can. My mother," his voice broke. "My mother worked for a woman like that. She promised to pay for my mother's treatment if she worked without days off. But it was a lie. My mother died waiting for money that never came." Thomas felt a sharp pain in his chest. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I didn't want it to happen to someone else. Even if it's someone rich like you." At that moment, Thomas understood that he had been asleep, living in a bubble of luxury while people like Daniel survived in the shadows, invisible and forgotten. And Olivia had used exactly that against him. She had turned his foundation, his desire to help, into a weapon. The doorbell rang. Helena had arrived. And with her, the answers Thomas needed would begin to surface. Helena Cardoso entered the apartment accompanied by a tall man wearing glasses, carrying 2 heavy briefcases. She looked at Daniel with surprise, then at Thomas, and asked no questions. That was one of the things Thomas admired most about her. "This is Dr. Paulo Mendez, a specialist in asset contracts," Helena introduced. "Now tell me everything." Thomas explained everything from the moment Daniel shouted at the church door to the revelations about the secret meetings. Helena listened with an increasingly grim expression. When he finished, she exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Mendez. "I need to see the documents you signed," she said. Gerald arrived 15 minutes later with 3 archive boxes. He was pale and sweating. "Mr. Brennan, there are reporters surrounding the building. They're saying you had a nervous breakdown." "Let them talk," Thomas replied calmly. "Gerald, I need you to do something very important. Go to Central Avenue, Santoro Building, underground parking. Look for a ventilation grate near the east wall. Take photos of everything that's there." Gerald frowned, confused, but nodded and left quickly. Helena and Dr. Mendez spread documents across the enormous dining table. They worked in silence for almost an hour, taking notes, comparing papers, whispering to each other. Daniel had fallen asleep on the couch, wrapped in Thomas's jacket. Finally, Helena looked up. Her face was tense. "Thomas, this is worse than we imagined." Dr. Mendez pushed his glasses up his nose. "You signed 7 documents over the last 6 months. Individually, each one seems harmless. A generous prenuptial agreement. A temporary power of attorney allowing Olivia to manage minor investments. A restructuring of the foundation to include her on the board. But together," Helena continued, "they form an almost perfect legal web. After the marriage, with the confirmation signature you were supposed to give today, Olivia would have majority control over your assets, your foundation, and even medical decisions if you became incapacitated." Thomas felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "How is that possible?" "I read the documents." "You read summaries," Dr. Mendez corrected gently. "Olivia's lawyers are brilliant. They used cross-referencing clauses. Each document refers to the others in ways that only make sense when read together. Separately, they look like simple protections. Together, they're a prison." Helena stood up and walked to the window. "There's more. The foundation has debts you're unaware of. Someone has been making unauthorized transfers for 3 months. If this becomes public, you'll be held responsible. Your reputation will be destroyed." "How did you find this out so quickly?" "Because I've seen this pattern before," Helena said bitterly. 5 years ago, I defended a client in a similar case. He lost everything before we could prove the fraud. He killed himself 6 months later." A heavy silence filled the room. Thomas looked at Daniel sleeping, so small and fragile. If that boy hadn't risked everything, Thomas would be signing his own sentence at that very moment. "Can we reverse this?" Thomas asked. Dr. Mendez and Helena exchanged looks. "Maybe," Dr. Mendez said carefully. But we need proof that you were intentionally deceived. It's not enough to show the documents are harmful. We need to prove bad faith. Thomas thought for a moment. Daniel said they met every Thursday. Today is Saturday. That means they met 2 days ago. And so? Helena asked. The building where Daniel slept has security cameras. If we can get the footage, we can prove that Olivia, Richard, and the lawyers were meeting secretly while courting me. Helena shook her head. That doesn't prove anything illegal. People can meet. But Daniel heard the conversations, Thomas insisted. He can testify. The testimony of a homeless child against a powerful family? Dr. Mendez said sadly. They'll destroy his credibility in seconds. Thomas slammed his fist on the table in frustration, waking Daniel with a start. The boy sat up quickly, looking around in fear. It's okay, Daniel, Thomas said gently. Sorry for waking you. Daniel rubbed his eyes. I can help. How? The boy stood up and walked to the table full of documents. He pointed to a specific paper. This one. I saw this paper at the meeting. Miss Olivia spilled coffee on it and got very angry. She tore it up and threw it in the trash. Helena picked up the document. It was the foundation restructuring agreement. Daniel, are you absolutely sure? Yes. There was a brown stain right on the corner. I remember because she cursed a lot. Dr. Mendez stood up suddenly. If we can get the original document from the trash at that office, we can prove that Olivia had access to the papers before you signed. We can question how she had those copies. At that moment, Gerald returned, out of breath, holding his phone. Mr. Brennan, I found the grate. And I found something else. He showed the phone screen. It was a photo of a small space behind the ventilation grate. There was a dirty blanket, some empty cans, and an old school notebook. Gerald swiped the screen, showing another photo. The notebook page was filled with notes in childish handwriting. Dates, times, names, fragments of conversations. Daniel had documented everything. Thomas felt a wave of emotion rush through his body. That boy, alone and scared, had done the work of a professional investigator. He had created evidence while simply trying to survive. Helena took the phone and zoomed in on the photos. Her eyes lit up. This changes everything. With these notes and Daniel's testimony, we can build a case. But we need to act fast. Olivia and Richard will try to make you look mentally unstable. They'll use the media against you. Thomas looked at everyone in the room. Gerald, loyal to the end. Helena, his former professor who had never doubted him. Dr. Mendez, a stranger willing to help. And Daniel, a boy who had nothing, but gave everything. Then let's give them a surprise, Thomas said with determination. We'll expose everything before they can control the narrative. Thomas picked up the phone and dialed a number he never imagined he would use. Marcus Ribeiro, host of the most watched investigative program in the country. They had been university classmates, but had lost touch years ago. Thomas Brennan, Marcus answered in surprise. The man who left his fiancée at the altar. You know this is all over the headlines, right? I know. And I'm going to give you the full story. But it has to be live, unedited, tonight. There was a pause. Are you serious? Completely. I have documents, witnesses, and proof of a conspiracy to steal my fortune. But if I don't speak first, they'll destroy me. Marcus didn't hesitate. I'll be there in 2 hours. Get everything ready. Meanwhile, Helena worked on a legal strategy. Dr. Mendez drafted an emergency petition to freeze all assets involved in the fraudulent documents. Gerald organized the evidence in chronological order. And Daniel, sitting in the corner of the room, watched everything with wide eyes. Thomas's phone rang. It was a private number. He answered. Thomas. Richard Montgomery's icy voice filled the room. You made a terrible mistake today. No, Richard. The mistake was yours when you underestimated a street boy. Oh yes. The little liar. Richard laughed without humor. Do you really think anyone will believe a homeless child over my family? I will destroy you socially, financially, and legally. When I'm done, you'll have nothing. Then why are you calling? Thomas asked calmly. "If you were so sure, you wouldn't be trying to intimidate me." The silence on the other end was revealing. "We can still resolve this civilly," Richard continued in a tense voice. "Forget this madness. Marry Olivia. No one needs to know the contractual details. You keep your reputation, we keep our interests. Everyone wins. Except my freedom and my assets." "You're naive, Thomas. Do you think justice exists for people like us? I have judges, prosecutors, and politicians in my pocket. I can make that boy disappear with a phone call." Daniel went pale when he heard that. Thomas felt anger burn through his veins. "Try to lay a hand on him and I'll personally hand you over to the press. Live. Tonight." Thomas hung up before Richard could respond. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was pure determination. 2 hours later, a film crew flooded the apartment. Marcus Ribeiro set up a simple set in the living room. Cameras, lights, microphones. Everything ready for a nationwide live broadcast. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked while testing the equipment. "Once this goes on air, there's no going back." Thomas looked at Daniel, who was sitting next to Helena. The boy nodded encouragingly. "I'm sure." At 8 p.m., they went live. Marcus began with a dramatic introduction about the cancelled wedding, showing footage of the chaos at the church. Then he handed the floor to Thomas. "Today I was supposed to make the biggest mistake of my life," Thomas began, looking straight into the camera. "Not because the marriage was wrong, but because I was being deceived. And the person who saved me wasn't a lawyer, a wealthy friend, or my intuition. It was a 10-year-old boy who sleeps by a ventilation grate because he has nowhere else to go." Thomas told the entire story. The fraudulent documents. The secret meetings. The plan to use the foundation as blackmail. He showed the papers, read excerpts from the clauses, explained how the trap worked. Then he called Daniel forward. The boy approached timidly. Marcus lowered the microphone to his height. "Daniel, can you tell us what you heard?" With a trembling but clear voice, Daniel recounted the conversations. He cited dates, times, specific phrases. He showed his notebook with the notes. The camera focused on the pages, zooming in on the childish handwriting full of spelling mistakes, yet incredibly detailed. "Why did you do this?" Marcus asked gently. "Because no one deserves to be robbed. Not even rich people," Daniel replied with devastating sincerity. "My mother always said that doing the right thing is hard, but it's the only thing we take with us when we die." The emotion in the boy's voice was impossible to fake. Thomas saw tears in the eyes of the film crew. Then came the final bombshell. Helena appeared on screen with Dr. Mendez. They explained the legal aspects of the fraud, showed official documents, and confirmed that a court petition had been filed 1 hour before the broadcast. "The Montgomery family used the legal system as a weapon," Helena stated firmly. "But the system can also be used for justice. All assets mentioned in the fraudulent contracts are now frozen pending a full investigation." Thomas's phone exploded with messages. He glanced quickly. They were from other businessmen, from previous victims of the Montgomery family, from lawyers offering help. The story was spreading like wildfire. Marcus ended the program with a promise to continue the investigation. As soon as the cameras were turned off, Thomas knelt in front of Daniel. "You saved my life," he said with a choked voice. "How can I thank you?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Can I sleep in a real bed tonight?" Thomas hugged the boy, feeling tears run down his face. Around them, Helena smiled, Gerald discreetly wiped his eyes, and even Marcus, the hardened journalist, had to turn away. At that moment, Thomas understood something fundamental. Power didn't come from money or a last name. It came from courage. And courage could come from anywhere, even from an invisible boy sleeping by a ventilation grate. The phone rang again. It was Richard Montgomery. Thomas didn't answer. That conversation was over. 3 months later, Thomas was sitting in a packed courtroom. The judge struck the gavel, officially closing the case against Olivia Montgomery and Richard Montgomery. Contract fraud, conspiracy, and attempted embezzlement. Guilty on all charges. Olivia was led out in handcuffs, without looking back. Richard, visibly aged, needed support to walk. The lawyers who had planned the scheme were also indicted. The news dominated every newspaper. But Thomas didn't feel victory. He felt only immense exhaustion and deep gratitude for having escaped. Outside the courthouse, reporters immediately surrounded Thomas. He raised his hand, asking for silence. "I won't comment on the verdict. Justice has spoken. What I want to talk about is who truly won today." Thomas looked to the side, where Daniel was standing, wearing new clothes and with freshly cut hair. This boy risked everything to save a stranger. He had nothing to gain and everything to lose. And even so, he chose the truth. Daniel blushed, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Thomas placed a caring hand on his shoulder. "That's why I'm announcing today the creation of the Daniel Costa program, within the Brennan Foundation. We will provide housing, education, and support for all homeless children in the city. Because if one invisible child could change my entire life, imagine what hundreds of them can do for the world." The applause was spontaneous. Daniel hugged Thomas tightly, hiding his face so no one would see his tears. Weeks turned into months. The foundation grew exponentially. Donations came from all over the country, from people inspired by Daniel's story. The new building was inaugurated with capacity to house 200 children, offering school, meals, psychological support, and professional training. Daniel was the first child registered in the program. He had his own room, books, toys, and most importantly, safety. Thomas had started the adoption process, but wanted to do it the right way, without rushing, allowing Daniel to decide when he was ready. One afternoon, Thomas and Daniel were walking through the park near the foundation. The boy had grown a few centimeters and gained weight. His smile appeared more often now. "Do you miss the ventilation grate?" Thomas asked jokingly. Daniel laughed. "No. But sometimes I miss the freedom. It sounds strange to say it, but when you have nothing, you also have nothing to lose. Now I'm afraid of losing everything again." Thomas stopped and knelt to be at the boy's height. "Daniel, listen. You will never lose what really matters. Your courage, your kindness, your heart. No one can take that from you. The rest are just things. But what if I disappoint you? What if I'm not good enough? You're already more than good enough. You taught me something I had forgotten." Thomas gently touched Daniel's chest. "That value doesn't come from a bank account or a last name. It comes from here. From what you do when no one is watching. From the choices you make when it would be easier to turn your back." Daniel hugged Thomas unexpectedly. "Do you think my mom would be proud of me?" The question tightened Thomas's heart. "I'm absolutely sure. She raised a boy who, even while hungry and cold, still thought about saving someone else. That's not just pride. That's a legacy." They returned to the foundation and found Helena, who had become a permanent advisor to the project. She was reviewing documents with Gerald, who now split his time between helping Thomas and coordinating volunteers. "We have 15 more families wanting to enroll children," Helena announced. "And 3 companies offering sponsorship." "Daniel's story keeps inspiring people," Gerald added. "We've received messages from 12 different countries." Thomas looked around. That office, which 3 months earlier had been empty and nearly bankrupt because of Olivia's sabotage, now pulsed with life and purpose. Children ran through the hallways. Teachers prepared lessons. Volunteers organized donations. All because a boy had the courage to shout the truth. That night, Thomas tucked Daniel into bed in the room that had been carefully decorated. There were fluorescent stars on the ceiling that glowed in the dark. "Thomas." Daniel called as he was about to leave. "Yes. Thank you for listening to me that day. Most people just looked at me like I was trash." Thomas came back and sat on the edge of the bed. "You know what I learned from you, Daniel? That the most important people in our lives usually appear when we least expect them. And they're usually the ones everyone ignores." Daniel smiled sleepily. "Are you really going to adopt me?" "If you want to be my son, it would be the greatest honor of my life." "I do," Daniel whispered, already closing his eyes. "But only if you promise one thing. Anything. That we'll never forget the other children who are still sleeping in ventilation grates." Thomas felt a lump in his throat. "I promise. And we'll do more than remember. We'll go find every single one of them." When Daniel fell asleep, Thomas stayed there for a few more minutes, watching the boy's chest rise and fall in calm breaths. He thought about how his life had completely changed. How he had been seconds away from losing everything by trusting the wrong people. And how he was saved by trusting the right one. 3 months earlier, he had been about to walk into a church for a wedding that would destroy him. Today, he was building a real family, based on genuine love and not on fraudulent contracts. Life had a funny way of working. Sometimes, salvation came from the most unlikely places. And sometimes, all you needed was someone brave enough to shout the truth, even when their voice trembled with fear. Thomas quietly left the room and looked out the window. Outside, the city continued alive, full of invisible stories happening on every corner. And now, he was determined to make a difference in at least some of them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Share in the comments what you thought and which city or country you're watching from. Your interaction helps more people discover stories that inspire